the more we can lean into that death, the reality that that is part of life, the more we open ourselves up to all of the beauty and the joy and the love of life as well. Because when we shelter ourselves from one thing, we shelter ourselves from many things. Grief is one side of love.
Welcome to Reclaim Your Radiance, a sex, love, and relationship podcast where our focus is on your most important relationship, the one with yourself. Each episode, we are joined by an insightful guest who shares their story about how they've become their best, most radiant selves despite diverse challenges. We dive into the depths of loving yourself, creating healthy relationships, and prioritizing pleasure, play, and joy, all while never shying away from the tough stuff. Are you ready? Let's get to it. Welcome to Reclaim Your Radiance. Today's episode is a conversation about death, loss, and grief. And I know these are very heavy topics, but let's face it, it's something that we don't talk about enough. And it's an inevitable part of life. I truly believe that being able to be intimate with grief, not being afraid of grief, will allow you to open yourself up to deeper levels of love and connection. Love and grief are two sides of the same coin, and you will need to be able to accept that a certain amount of love usually produces the equal and opposite amount of grief at some point along the line. Not always, but we've got to be ready for it. How sad would it be to shut ourselves off from love because we are afraid that one day we might lose it? What if we simply prepared ourselves for that chance, and some may even say inevitability, and talked about it? We also talk today about the transformational aspects of grief and loss. They often create spaces of profound transformation, especially when what we are losing is part of ourselves. This is what is sometimes known as a shadow loss, the loss of something, a relationship, a hope, a dream, a physical ability maybe. We talk today about how essential it is to pause and make space, making time for yourself during these times in our lives. We talk about how to support yourself through a loss of any kind or the death of a loved one, and how to do the same for those that you love. We also get into the strange avoidance that Western society seems to have around even just the idea of death, as well as the importance and beautiful role that ritual can play in getting us through those really, really tough situations. So let's not shy away from death and loss today. Let's take a moment to accept this hard reality and talk about how this affects our lives and how we can experience the fullness of our humanity and that sense of vitality and aliveness, even through tough times, and especially in tough times when we give and receive what we really, really need. Talking with us today about these topics is the wonderful and miraculous Maux Elworthy. She is a death doula, a trauma-informed coach, and a suicide intervention educator who creates spaces for conversations about grief, loss, death, and mental health in our everyday lives. She even hosts a free death cafe for those who are local to Vancouver, Canada. The next one is on July 9th at the Kitsilano Neighborhood House. And for more information on that and other offerings and services, check out the podcast description for links to her website and Instagram profile. And one last thing before we get started, I wanted to let you know some exciting new updates and offers. For all listeners, if you are seeking to transform your sex life or your romantic relationships, come talk to me. If you want to deepen your pleasure, have more incredible orgasms, rid yourself of painful sex, or feel more aliveness and vitality and radiance flowing through your veins, come talk to me about one-on-one sex coaching. For listeners in the Vancouver area or anywhere in BC, I will be offering my very first 2-day immersive retreat on Bowen Island from September 20th to 22nd. Applications are now open. It is called Wild Woman Rising, and it is a sacred sensuality retreat for women and pussy owners who wish to deepen their pleasure, create a powerful relationship with their bodies, immerse themselves in sisterhood and nature, and reclaim that primal sense of being fully, radiantly alive. I am so excited for this incredible experience. There are only 12 spots available, so get your applications in quick. There will be a link in the podcast description for that as well. And lastly, for anyone hitting up the festival circuit in BC this summer, come find me at a variety of local Burning Man events, and maybe even a couple festivals such as Friends Club, which the link will be posted below, and Burning Man itself. This summer, I'll be offering a whole new slew of fun workshops at these events, which include sex magic, heart-opening breathwork, pussy worship, body worship, a female anatomy lesson, cosmic pleasure breathwork, and so much more. All right, that is it for now. Let's talk about death, baby. Let's talk about... Ooh. Let's go. Hey, how's it going?
Woohoo! Hey, Kris. I'm well. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm so excited to have you join us today to chat about death and about transformation and rebirth and grief and all of these wonderful, amazing topics that are so part of life that we run the other direction from and pretend that they don't exist. And then it makes it really hard to deal with them when they inevitably come into our lives.
Yeah, I'm grateful to be here. I don't know if excited is the word. It's so interesting to be working in this space of, shadow topics and stigmatized conversations. Yeah, it's really a joy for me to be here and to be able to chat with you and converse around some of these things in life that are sometimes heavy and hard and also so beautiful in the flow of the human experience. So thanks for having me.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So beautifully said. So diving right in then, so your role is as a death doula. And I'm curious if you can tell us more about what that means and what it looks like to be a death doula.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I prefer the term death doula. There's other phrases like end of life doula. But I love the term death doula because I think it's a bit of activism around saying the word death, which catches people off guard in a way that makes some people uncomfortable. But I think, no, let's call it what it really is. It's a human death. And a doula, the term doula comes from the Greek word of doula, which just means servant or helper. And so our intention as a doula is to be there in whatever way is needed. And so for a death doula, for me, what that means is that I provide practical, emotional, and spiritual support for people. It could be a one person, family system, a community before, during, or after a death or a loss. So sometimes the work that I do is supporting people through grief of a different kind of loss other than a death of a life. And I know we'll talk a bit more about that, I'm sure, as we talk about other kinds of death or other losses that humans experience and maybe want support around. And there's lots of different ways to be a death doula. Some people focus on the practical legal side of things, encouraging people to get their wills in order and talk to their family about what their medical wishes, or what they would want if they were to have a diagnosis or have a life-limiting situation. And other people are more hands-on, providing vigilant support as someone is dying. My experience professionally has been more in grief and crisis response. And so I come to this work with an interest in being there for people as their loved ones are dying. So I often support caregivers or family members as someone is transitioning out of this life.
Wow. Okay. That's a huge job. Thank you for being there for people. I don't know, that's the first thing that comes to mind of thank you for doing that job. Cause that's wildly supportive to everybody and communities.
I feel grateful. I feel really blessed to do this kind of work. And I feel sometimes people say, well, that's a big job or that's a hard job. And maybe it's not a job everyone wants to do. And I feel like it's a calling for me that I really feel that I found a place in grief and loss support. And there are so many other jobs that I have so much awe for, people who do amazing things like engineering and driving big trucks and so many wonderful things that, just different aptitudes, I think. And I'm so grateful that there are so many humans doing diverse things to support the community. And yeah, this is one way that I feel in service. So
Beautiful. Yeah, that's well said. And so how did you come to find this as your calling? How did you get into it?
Yeah, so the first thing that comes to mind is supporting my grandmother and my family in general as my grandmother was dying. early in COVID and noticing, yeah, that my family was so uncomfortable talking about death. And my grandma was in her 90s and she'd had a wonderful life and she had been really unhappy for many years. And so um, she and I talked really openly about her desire to die. And having worked in suicide intervention since 2006, I feel really comfortable having those kinds of conversations with people. And so I often will open it up when I see the invitation to ask. And so I'd been talking to my grandmother about her desire to die for years. And then when it came to seeing the physical signs of dying in her, I saw the discomfort in people around her. Even the medical system was like, don't worry, we're going to get you back home. You know, she was in the hospital. As soon as we can, we'll get you back in. And she didn't want to go back home, right? So it's this whole, okay, why are we not talking about what's happening? And this was a really natural process of dying in, her mid 90s. And yet still the system, my family, medical providers were so awkward and uncomfortable talking about what was happening. And so I got to support my gran in having conversations with people who loved her, um, encouraging my family to call her and say goodbye or do anything that they wanted while she was still here with us. And I feel really blessed to have been able to have that experience because, afterwards, one of my aunts shared that she wasn't afraid. My gran wasn't afraid because she knew what was happening. She kept saying, oh, well, I talked about this, Maureen, I'm dying. It's okay. That pain is all right. These things are natural. And so, yeah, I feel really grateful to have been there for her. And through that process, I was asking these questions of, oh, okay, well, if the nurses and the doctors aren't talking about death openly, who is? And a mentor of mine said, oh, there's a thing called the death doula. And I didn't know that this whole occupation existed. And so then I fell down the internet rabbit hole, found a course to take, many books to read, had a stack of books. I just got so interested in grief and loss and caring for people who are dying. And so that's what opened the door to grief and loss. But like I said, that work kind of started earlier in my life. In my early 20s, I was volunteering on a crisis line and working in suicide intervention. And that's probably what started my desire to be there with people in hard moments and have conversations that are, as you said, being pushed away or that we're running from in other parts of life.
Yeah. Wow. And so like that sounds like such an impactful moment of like, yeah, like you were really there for your family and you're like, oh my gosh, I can be there for other families in the same way. And like that, and noticing that, and that's a really good point, that noticing that like the doctors aren't doing this and like they want to be like pass away and like all that other stuff, like not using the word death. And like I can resonate with that. Like I like, especially in our culture, I guess that's my question here is like, what are your thoughts on like the Western society's view on death and the fact that like we are just shoving it away? Like I've never seen a dead body. That's
Mm-hmm.
crazy. Like I should. That's part of life is seeing that. And so yeah, like and for a while, like I couldn't even say the word death. Like I got anxious around it. And like I'd picture my own and I'd just be so scared. And so like, yeah, like what's your reviews on Western society? Where do you think we should go?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Such a big topic. I love, there's a wonderful book called Being Mortal by Atul Gawande who really explores this from a doctor's perspective. He's a doctor and he asks some of these questions. Because yes, in Western society, we really do hide death away. Even the elderly, like we put people in homes and we don't see some of those more vulnerable, intimate moments of aging or declining towards death as people in other cultures or other countries or even multi-generational families would see. And so, yeah, I think about that a lot. I traveled in India in my teenage years and I got to see a lot of death. And it was so confronting coming from, my family where we don't talk about those things. I didn't see those things. Even the way that we have celebration of life or funerals here is so different. I remember being in India and going to Varanasi and seeing people being carried out on funeral pyres and burned in the Ghats on the Ganges, and just seeing the power of ceremony and ritual and people's contribution, being able to be present and be hands-on in that moment. And I think that there's a lot to say in terms of closure and completion when we are able to see death. Well, I know some funeral directors who are big supporters of families seeing their loved one and their body dead, even wrapped in a shroud, if that's possible, more than just a box or um, an urn full of cremated remains. If we can see a person who is no longer breathing, then there is a sense of closure for many people. And I think it's something that we really need to work towards in terms of being comfortable having those conversations. I kind of relate it to like the sex talk for kids. It's like, when do we have the death talk for kids? And that conversation needs to be layered in throughout our lifetime and different levels, or understanding added as we age, because otherwise it is so confronting. I think, okay, personal story. I had goldfish as a kid. And I remember believing that these goldfish were magical because they would change color. It was amazing. Like Spot all of a sudden became stripy, and then stripy would become orangey. And eventually, I one day went to the washroom and saw a goldfish floating in the toilet because it didn't get flushed down properly. And my dad had been, surreptitiously replacing these goldfish in the middle of the night when they died so that we didn't learn about the death of these beloved goldfish. And I just think, wow, that's such a, thinking back now, that's such a perfect example of how much we avoid death and letting children see death in safe ways. And I think that that's something that is changing too.
Yeah, I definitely hope so. And the fish example is hilarious. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, I definitely had a fish like that too. I was like, it's amazing. This fish has been alive for 5 years. Like, I know that like the
Yeah,
Siamese fighting fish last for so long, but like it's been 5 years. And then like five
yeah.
or 10 years later, my dad's like, oh, didn't we replace that one? I was like, excuse me. I was like so mad. It's like, how
Hmm.
did you not just tell me? Like, it's that like, I mean, I have a very like strong like honesty streak where I'm like, no, honesty above everything else. But even in that, I was like, I was mad that my parents wouldn't even just tell me straight up, like, hey, your fish died. Like,
Yeah.
that's a different fish. Like, that's a different, like, I mean, goldfish is a whole different story when they like die every week. That could be kind of traumatizing.
Yeah, but I think it really, just really shines a light on that question of why are we so afraid to say that your goldfish died?
Yeah. There's
What?
so I mean there's so many beautiful cultures like I think of Mexico and like their
Hmm.
like Day of the Dead and their ability to
Hmm.
celebrate this so much and have an altar with all the family members on it, and I apologize if I'm
Hmm.
brutalizing this culture because I don't actually know it. I'm literally just thinking of Coco, but like but like yeah, like all these beautiful cultures where it's so visible and it's so like death is part of life. Like let's celebrate it. Let's like honor the skeletons. Like instead
Hmm.
we put it in the ground. And like also the fact that it's like super unenvironmentally friendly the way we deal with it too. Like we're using
Hmm.
up huge amounts of land and preserving them
Hmm.
for putting humans in boxes where they're not just going to be returned to the earth. I think that's kind of like ridiculous, but
Hmm. Yeah, even cremation, which is, from a land-based perspective, not as consumptive, takes a huge amount of energy to cremate a body. And then there's a lot of chemicals involved in the process as well, so that the cremated remains actually like, shouldn't be returned to the earth. So people have this beautiful image often of wanting to bury the remains of their loved one in a garden, and plants die because there's so much, yeah.
oh,
So
wow.
there are many things you can do with cremated remains, which is a whole other conversation and very fascinating, and wonderful ways to bring the the memory of that person into your life through jewelry or stones or yeah, other ways to remember someone. But yeah, I think about that too in terms of how far we've come from the natural process of death and how manufactured and controlled the whole system and industry is really.
Yeah. And so you say that like you've kind of seen it changing. Like in what ways have you seen it changing?
Yeah. So I would say, so we're in Vancouver, we're on the West Coast. And so I can only speak to this little bubble, this wonderful part of the world where I see a lot of funeral directors now really wanting to encourage the family to get involved with the body of their dead loved one, if possible. And so sometimes that looks like family members dressing the body, or maybe washing the face or anointing the body with oil or herbs, or having some kind of ceremony or ritual around the body before it goes to cremation or burial. I also know of a death doula who wrote some children's books and explained death and different kinds of death through a beautiful little picture book that she put together with the help of her children in their classrooms. It was really lovely. So she had a book around death and related the metaphor to a dying tree and just explained human death in that way. And she also wrote a book about suicide and death by opioid poisoning, and just really trying to have those conversations with children younger than for sure happened for me. I'm not sure. Sounds like for you as well with the goldfish. Yeah, so I see some ways that it is changing, and I think, there's a desire to go back to how we once were, where we used to care for our own dead. We would, in families, care for, attend to, and then support each other through the dying process and be very hands-on in that experience. And now it's very much outsourced to the industry. And I think there are some, I'm going to say feminist, female-run funeral homes that are really trying to empower families to be involved because they have seen it really supportive and healing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And so what is one of the most like impactful things that you've seen in this work?
Oh, I'm going to say the power of ritual. So I've been privileged enough to be with individuals and a couple of families as well around the body of their loved one. And I'm thinking about a time when a client's sibling was dying, but it was a very slow process, and they've been in hospice for quite some time. And we gathered the family and designed a ritual to say goodbye and release him and allow every family member to say their final words to him, because it seemed like he was really holding on in some ways. And seeing people in that moment who really felt powerless, who didn't know what to do. We're just sitting by the bed. We don't know what to do. And all of a sudden, they had something to do. I said, go find his favorite scripture, bring it. They made a playlist. Someone brought in photos and made an altar and brought their favorite things to the bedside, and were able to be in action and showing their love for him in that moment. And just the power of that. And yeah, my client called me a few days later and said it was so impactful and so powerful in terms of letting the family let go and say the things that they wanted to say but didn't know how, or there wasn't the perfect moment.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really beautiful. And that like ritual as in like, yeah, giving that space to be able to, because yeah, like you're kind of just in this confused state, like who's going to talk now? Like if I talk, am I taking up too much space? And like, is this the appropriate time to do it? But yeah, really just like it sounds like you're like really setting a container for everyone to share like beloved memories. And yeah, I can see how that would really kind of go through many of the different death and transformation areas that we wanted to talk about today too, that like that ritual has been lost as well, I think, in a lot of our Western society, like, and it's coming back and it's really beautiful to see. But like there's even, because there's rituals in terms of like my sex coaching has a lot of rituals in it too, right? We're slowly coming around to the fact that ritual doesn't need to mean like with the church. It doesn't have to be organized religion. It doesn't even have to be spirituality, that it can just be a way to really feel a moment and to set a container and yeah, that's really beautiful. Thank you
And
for
to
sharing.
honor something or someone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's more common to have ritual or ceremony after the death. We think about celebration of life where there might be storytelling or sharing or candle lighting vigils, or and any of those experiences. But I think thinking about other points along the grief process as someone is dying, there can be ritual. Um, After someone dies for a long time, we could engage in ritual as a way to be with our grief.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of things that we do that we don't call rituals. Like we're not calling it by its name. And so in like we're almost stripping some of the power away from the ritual by not naming it, right? Like
Mm.
that, let's say, for example, like on the anniversary or like on my grandfather's birthday, like I would go and do something to honor him. And like I don't even think I knew what I was doing until later. And it was like, oh, right. And like now I can recognize that as a ritual and that, and like,
Mm.
yeah, naming it and claiming that it's a ritual and like even just giving myself a couple more things around it would make it so much more powerful.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned that because a lot of people that I support are hesitant to engage in ritual or ceremony. And yeah, definitely sometimes get a little bit of a eye roll or you know, well, Mo will bring the woo. Mo is the woo one. Well, don't make it too strange. Like, what are you going to burn here? And it's interesting that we have that reaction. And when you said religion, I thought, oh, maybe that's where some of this hesitancy comes from people who aren't don't consider themselves spiritual or religious. But like you said, I don't think ritual has to be necessarily spiritual, although I think this whole, for me, this whole world of death is very sacred. And for me has a lot, it feels like a soul calling. And I feel that I am here to support the souls of the, community. Um, but my spiritual beliefs are my own and my work, I always want to make space for other people. And so whether that's religion or no religion or atheism and anything in between, spiritual openness. It doesn't have to be a spiritual ritual to be powerful, right? It could be as simple as like one ritual, we take off our shoes when we walk in the door. Some
Yeah.
people drink a coffee in the morning. That's a ritual.
Yeah, totally. And like I think it does potentially stretch pretty heavily into like, yeah, that fear of religion or that fear of like, I could definitely see where a lot of people would go straight from ritual to religion to exorcism to, oh my God, you're going to do something scary and witchy to my loved one who is dying,
Right.
like, yeah, like I could
Yeah.
see that happening.
Right. Oh yeah, I don't think about that witch component very often, but yeah, that's true. I can imagine. I think also for some people, there's been real trauma around religious ceremony. And for sure, people experience trauma around death and dying as well, or even trauma within the medical system. So I think sometimes people are, yeah, hesitant.
Yeah, totally. And so if there
Um,
is, so ritual is the best thing that you've seen and that like, and that you kind of like experienced in this space. Is there something that like you haven't seen that much that you would love to bring into it that you feel like is missing?
okay. As you said that, I thought, ooh, now I'm not sure if ritual is my number one thing, but that was a very powerful, that example of one story of ritual was a very powerful moment and day for me. Um, I would say holding a container for conversations that haven't been had yet is the most powerful thing or most important thing. And so I think that that would be the thing I'd want to see more of to answer your second question of what do I not see happening that I would love to see more of is, yeah, death education in schools or, you know, more Canadians making a will and having conversations with their loved ones on a regular basis because we, one thing I know about the human experience is that we don't know what is going to happen. We are not in control or we're not in charge. And we often think we know what tomorrow is going to look like. And unfortunately, often unexpected things happen in life frequently to people of all ages in all states of health. And so that's one thing that I never take for granted is that I don't know how long I will live and I don't know under what conditions I will die. And I would love for more people to be in conversation around that regularly because I think it's empowering.
Hmm. Yeah. And I appreciate what you said at the beginning about the just using the word death. And I have a
Mhm.
close friend who, yeah, their parent passed away when they were a teenager. And so they like, and they're very close to this kind of stuff as well. They're like, no, use the word. Like, I'm not gonna shelter you from the word death. I'm not going to like step away from this. I'm gonna like,
Mhm.
it's gonna be right there. And it's gonna like, yes, if you shudder away, like face that. And that's something you need to look at because this is a part of life and you literally cannot run away from it. Like death and taxes, they're both coming for you.
Yeah, yeah. And some of my favorite, teachers would say things like, the more we can lean into that death, the reality that that is part of life, the more we open ourselves up to all of the beauty and the joy and the love of life as well. Because when we shelter ourselves from one thing, we shelter ourselves from many things. And so, grief is one side of love, essentially. And pain is mixed in with love. And yeah, and there's a real connection, I think, there between loss and grief and being alive.
Hmm. Yeah, I really love the idea that yeah, grief and love are two sides of the same coin. And that
Hmm.
when people like 'cause some people are so afraid of love that they won't love because they're so afraid of the other side of that
Hmm.
grief. And
Hmm.
like there's such an acceptance in going, okay, well, like grief is part of this and also feeling grief, it feels like love, right? Oh my gosh, there's this one amazing quote that's
Hmm.
like oh my, I can't remember it right now. I hope I get to just like splice it in, but it's basically like I'm so happy to feel grief because it means that I loved. That quote I did remember later. It's that grief is love with nowhere to go.
Yes.
And like you
Yes.
only get the amount of like I feel like they're equal and opposites. Like you can't have the high peaks of love without also experiencing those low scoops of grief.
Yes. Absolutely. Okay. So one of my favorite writers on this topic is Francis Weller, and he writes a lot about sorrow and grief and loss. And I have a quote here on my desk by him because it's a reminder for me. So Francis Weller says, grief is essential to finding and maintaining a feeling of emotional intimacy with life, with one another, and with our own soul.
Mm, yeah. And like it goes to the idea too that you sometimes don't realize what it is you have until you think of losing it. And we forget that things all end and that you can't escape it. And even a relationship where it's like, we're going to be together forever. Like, even if it's forever, that's till the end of your life or the end of their lives. And you
Mhm.
cannot escape that. Like, it will end one way or another. Either you'll break up or one of you will die. Like, it's like
Mhm.
maybe that's pessimistic, but that's an opportunity to love each moment that you have together more.
Mhm. And I think love our lives more, be more fully in our lives, more fully in our relationships with our loved ones, but also with ourselves. You know, r really confronting the fact that I won't be here forever makes me want to dive in deeper while I'm
Mhm.
here.
Yeah, 100%. Oh, yes, 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 yes. So, part of the reason that I really wanted to have this conversation was also to speak about like death as like transformation and also like not just death in the physical sense, but what lessons can we take from like the real thing and your experience and kind of and look at it from the lens of like everything ends and relationships ending and like the death of a relationship. Um, and even yeah like the deaths of like inner pieces inside you, right? When like this part of you no longer serves you and has to die. And I think of like
Mhm.
the tarot card, even though I'm not like a tarot person, but I think of that
Mhm.
card as being like like when I first saw it, I was like, oh my God, that's terrifying. Like I was still in that space where I was terrified of it. And it was shown to me and I was like,
Hmm.
oh, like, does that mean I'm gonna die? And it's like, no, 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 that just means transformation. And I was like, oh, and I think that really started a different thought process around it. So yeah, I'm curious what you think around those things.
Yeah, I want to know more. Like, what did that acceptance of the death card meaning transformation for you? What did that allow for you when you really let that in?
Really just the idea of like something being such a strong transformation that you equate it to death. I think
Hmm.
that's it, that like the transformation goes so deep, the transfer, like that you need to let parts of you die in order for other parts to live. And that like that's how large transitions can feel, right? And yeah, that's what really happened in that way. And it's funny because I can still remember when I drew it like a couple years ago, and I remember there being like two large things that I was like, it's either this one or this one. One of them is
Hmm.
going to topple. As much as I believe in tarot and don't believe in tarot, and that's a whole different conversation. But yeah, and it was like this kind of preparation of okay, and then what do we do to prepare, and what do we do afterwards, and how do we make sure that this is at least moving forward in a positive way?
Yeah, I think often we have to accept that, you said parts of you are dying. And I think kind of looking back on life, we often can look back and think, oh, I'm not who I was back then at all. Right. And that is a kind of death, I think, and a renewal and a rebirth. And there is so much opportunity there if we really do allow things in ourselves or parts of ourselves or even just a chapter of our life to close and to die. We make a lot of space for what is new and what is next and what we really want to cultivate there.
Mhm. Yeah. And so what would be like from your experience, I'm curious, what would be your like greatest piece of advice for somebody going through that transition? Like what would you suggest that they do?
Yeah. Okay. So there's so many transitions in life too, right? I think about that in terms of this idea of letting parts of ourselves die or letting something die. Um, there's a thanatologist that I love named Cole Imperi, who I don't know personally, but is brilliant and has wonderful content and conversations. And thanatology is just the study of death and dying. So she writes a lot about shadow loss, which is the loss of something, not of someone. So that exactly this, like parts of us are getting lost. No one has died, but maybe a relationship has died, a hope has died, a dream, a career path, a hobby, a physical ability, any of these human experiences can be seen as shadow loss and are very transformational times. And I would say pretty big moments in life to pause and make space and time for. Um, yeah. So your question, give yourself space and time. Be with feelings, all of the feelings and emotions and experiences that come through grief, because I think grief hits us. Sometimes people explain grief as an emotion, but I would say grief is a process and it's full of all sorts of different emotions. And it hits us physically, mentally. People talk about the grief fog of not being able to remember things as well. People have different cravings physically, different ability mentally, spiritually, and socially. So sometimes people isolate through those times of loss or transition. Sometimes they lean on different supports or find different community. And often that's something that I've seen as a common struggle is our human avoidance of pain and the isolation that can come from that. So not only, oh, do I not want to feel pain in me for me, but if I care and love you, I don't want to see you in pain. And so it's hard for me to ask you the questions about the thing that might bring pain for you. And so I've seen a lot of people thinking about your friend who leaned into the term death after a parent died at a young age. Often people around that person don't know how to talk about our loved one that died or talk about the loss or the trauma, the experience that we had. It can be really hard for the people closest to us to understand the loss and the grief and to know how to talk about it. And that's something I hear again and again is people just saying, well, I just want to talk about her. No one says his name anymore. People avoid me on Mother's Day. No one invites me for Christmas, or people send me pitying looks, right? So people don't know how to engage with us when we're going through grief and loss. And I think that that is one thing that I think we all need to equip ourselves for is how do we lean in and be with our people who we love when they're struggling and going through these moments of loss. Asking people what they need. How can I help you? Can I send you food? Can I bring you to an appointment? Can I invite you for dinner? Do you like fresh cut flowers? A phone call or a text to check in, you know, finding ways to receive that support. And then time alone. I'm a big fan of finding ways to process and go through the experience instead of trying to get over it. How to really be in it, be with the feelings, whether that's talk therapy, meditating, your favorite sport, being in a beautiful place. I think everyone has a different process for that, but I think in our culture, we so often want people to get over, get through, get on with, that it's important to slow down.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so good. There's so much amazing stuff in there. Like, especially what one of the things that hit me was just the like, we don't know how to talk about it. And we
Mm-hmm.
don't know how to talk to somebody who's going through it. And that's so true. I even think like, and you mentioned like somebody who's like, yeah, like lost a certain ability. Like if
Yeah.
one of your friends has an accident and all of a sudden they're in a wheelchair, like, how
Mm-hmm.
do you talk about it? And you just feel so like there's almost guilt. Like we've been taught to feel guilty that
Mm-hmm.
we have a certain amount of like privilege and like because it's one thing I think to, experience a certain level of privilege over your lifetime. And then it's a whole other thing to like have that privilege taken away and having to like, yeah, that's a loss. That's something you need to grieve. And oh my gosh, yeah, like I'm guilty of that 100% of like, I just don't know what to say. And so I don't say anything. And that's so much worse than like kind of stumbling through it awkwardly to be like, hey, do you want to talk about the fact that you don't have this body part anymore? Like, I don't know what to say.
Yeah,
So, yeah,
it's
any
so, I
advice
think
on the person who's in that situation?
in that I don't know what to say situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're giving that example, and I thought, oh, yeah. And then often what happens is we don't invite that person out to do the thing anymore. Like, let's say we used to go hiking together. Well, now you might not be able to engage in that activity in the same way. Of course, you can still engage in that activity, but similar with loss. Like, I think about, mental health a lot and relating it to trying to use that metaphor of physical health. Often when we're struggling through mental health or grief or loss, we might not be able to engage in the activity we still love in the same way. And if people don't know how to invite us in, they might just avoid us, right? Similar relationship breakup. Well, we used to do this thing with all these couples and now they're not together. So do I just invite one of them or neither of them? Or it's just people get awkward. So just that being another loss, right? I mean, I'm a big fan of direct communication. I think I think a lot about how it's often not so much like what we say, but how we say it. And it's often not so much what exactly we do, but how we are for our people. So, really leaning into the love that you have for that person, noticing what's mine. I'm uncomfortable. I'm awkward. What do they need? Because what I is my my discomfort or awkwardness here as important as their need? No. So how can I meet their need? And sometimes that means taking care of ourselves, like maybe processing your feelings about that person's loss with somebody else outside of that primary relationship, if that makes sense. So someone in your life is going through a big loss and it's impacting you in a big way. I'm thinking about couples, finding support for yourself, whether that's a good friend or a counselor or a support group, so that you can really process that experience and then be present for your person.
Yeah, right. Because there's nothing worse than, you're like, for example, maybe like you're going through the death of your mother, and then like your partner is having a hard time with the fact that you're having grief, and then they want to talk to you about the fact that they're grieving. And it's like, okay, no, I really can't handle that. Like that is not for me to hold. And like that can't be what happens here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think we need to give each other some grace and some patience too. If someone's in grief or experiencing a loss, they might need more space. They might not be able to show up in your relationship in the same way that they used to. Same with friends. They might not have as much capacity for you. And so, that can impact relationships. People sometimes withdraw, and I think from the outside world, the non-grievers in the situation need to kind of lean in and be persistent with our love in ways that's consensual and supportive, of course. But I think we need to, love bomb those people more than usual and meet them where they are, which can be hard, I think, especially if it's yeah, I think a lot about that shadow loss. Sometimes we don't know someone's going through grief and loss, if someone has had a miscarriage, for example, we might not know that that's their experience. And so finding ways to have compassion for the people around us.
Yeah. I like that you brought up like love bombing, because I feel like we always think of that as such a negative thing that somebody can do at the beginning of a relationship and like give somebody way too much attention and then take it away. But like love bombing in the like beautiful way of doing it, when it's like this person, like, okay, we talked about this yesterday. They want to talk about it again today and again the next day. And they want to hear it over and over and over again because that's the only thing on their mind.
Mhm.
And they don't want to have to be the one to bring it up. Like even like I think about like a relationship where there's a couple and like maybe there's been a like a rupture, right? Where one of them has what one of them cheated on the other maybe, and like the one, if they decide to stay and work through it, like that one apology isn't enough, and that it needs to happen over and over again, and the person who's been hurt doesn't want to have to be the one who brings it up, right? They
Mhm.
need like they can ask for it, like the person who's hurt, like if there's that amazing communication between the two, they can say, hey, this is what I need, can you support me in this way? And it needs to be continuous, like
Mhm.
until the other person says, hey, stop. Like there's probably no harm in continuing to bring that up and continuing to offer the space to think about it and to talk about it. And especially if you're the one who is the cause, right? If you're the partner who kind of did something that the other partner's hurt from, like bringing it up and saying, yeah, saying I'm sorry as much as you can, or not even I'm sorry. I recently learned about what's it called? Apology languages. So, which is
Mm.
like linked to grief in a way, if you're the one who like caused the grief from like a rupture, but that there's different ways that we all need to, experience like an apology, experience repair. And like, I guess it probably links to grief, that there's probably like ways that people express their grief
Mhm.
languages.
For sure. Yeah, I'm thinking about that, like taking accountability for that hurt that was caused. But when you said that, it's not just a one-time conversation in terms of taking responsibility for a rupture. It's the same with grief, right? Imagine someone's person dies, they might want to talk about that person a lot for a long time. And sometimes, going back to Western society and our medical understandings of grief, or like our culturally acceptable length of time to grieve, we often think, okay, it's going to be a chunk of time and then they moved on, right? But what we really know is that there are these kind of grief milestones, and the grief stays with us. It just changes. And so if someone, you know, lost a parent, they're going to be thinking about them on the birthdays, on the Mother's Day, Father's Day, on holidays, on, I don't know, the time they always took a summer vacation together. There are going to be moments in life too. I had a client whose parent died a long time ago, but then she became a parent. And so her grief was coming up in all these unexpected ways in times when she was caring for her child, not having her own parent there. These moments when we thought our person would be there alongside us, or she wanted to ask, for advice, and that parent wasn't there. And having compassion and understanding that makes a lot of sense, that is so human and that is so normal, and normalizing grief, whatever it looks like for somebody. And like you said, we all grieve differently, right? So I think that that's really, really important to also highlight for people, is that there's no timeline and there's no set expectation to, be different or move on. And I think that's something that I have a bit of a frustration. Our medical system has put recently in the DSM-5, this idea of long haul grief, that we can actually have a diagnosis of you've been grieving too long.
Oh, that doesn't sound helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because like telling anybody that they're doing something for too long, like that could also very much mean that like they haven't gotten the support that they need.
Right.
And so they're still going. Yeah, no, that bugs me a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Right, like you said, it's a process, and nothing sucks more than having somebody tell you you're doing this wrong. This
Yeah.
love that you have, it's inconvenient for me now because you're still talking about it. It's like,
Yeah.
no, I like if you're and even I think that translates into relationships too. When a relationship ends, like that
Mm-hmm.
people still need to talk about it. And then all of a sudden you're supposed to talk about them like they're the devil and that you can't mention their name. And I definitely sometimes feel like, oh, I've mentioned this person's name way too many times. And like
Mm-hmm.
maybe there's something in there too where we can like encourage our friends to still talk about them, right? Like just because they're
Mm-hmm.
gone doesn't mean all of that part of your life is erased.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Especially, in relationships, often those are so foundational for the evolution of who we are as a human. So our past partners, helped make us who we are today. And yeah, and you mentioned, oh, sometimes we just want to talk about exes as if they're the devils. Well, the opposite can happen when someone dies. All of a sudden, people only think they're allowed to talk about the beautiful, wonderful things about a human. And of course, we are complex beings. And probably there was something about so and so that rubbed you the wrong way, or they had this annoying habit. And I think it's really healthy to laugh about those things or be able to share those things too, right? And yeah, you said it's inconvenient, the grieving for how long. And I was thinking, like, for whom is that inconvenient? The system, right? The system is like, well, you should be able to get it together and go back to work and be productive, for capitalism and the colonial system needs you to be so. So it's inconvenient if you're crying at the post office, honey. Get it together. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's just so not human. We are animals, and we're going to be feeling feelings. And ultimately,
Yeah.
when someone dies, it's a whole part of the system is missing forever.
I think about like one of my favorite animals is orca whales and
Mm.
the like I don't know if you knew this, but like the like each like different pod in different areas of the world, like the pods they all have like different cultures, and they've observed like death rituals happening even in orca whales, that like
Mm.
there was a baby that died in a family, and like the mother had it like sitting on its hump on its head. I don't know whale words,
Mm.
but like it had it sitting on there for like a week, and they like swam with it, this like dead baby, because like and it was so obvious, like their sounds, because they all have like different languages, their sounds were like sounds of grief. And like
Mhm.
it was just so evident that, like, oh my gosh, everybody grieves. Like even, oh my gosh, one of the most like terrifying sounds I've ever heard in my life was I was in Australia and I heard like like the sound of like 50 cows crying. And you could
Mm.
tell that they were crying in pain. And I was like, what is this noise? I looked at my host. I was like, oh my God, what? Because we were
Mhm.
like out in the country. So it was like there was
Mhm.
farms nearby. And he's like, yeah, that's the calving. They just took all of the baby calves away from their mothers. And we
Oh,
heard that crying of those cows was day and night for 3 days.
wow.
And
Oh,
just like animals experience grief too.
oh yeah.
I mean, because we are animals, but like,
Yeah. But powerful to hear it in that herd mentality, to hear that wailing. And I think that, yeah, another part of grief that needs to be communal is that we need to be witnessed in our grief and we need to have people who will come alongside and cry with us or yell or scream or wail with us in that cow way because there is a part of us that wants to be connected, especially in those times of loss.
yeah. hmm And so I think like we have touched on like so many good things to give ourselves like space and I think acceptance and yeah, being able to like not stop talking about it and like offer people the chance to do it. But like if we're personally the ones going through it, is there anything else that like would be really big in terms of like what can we give ourselves?
Mm. Hmm. I think I would ask, what is it that you really deeply need?
Yeah.
And often it's permission. How do you give yourself permission to do that or to take that or to be that?
Yeah. Giving yourself permission to not be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And to receive help and to ask for help and to find your unique way forward. I really, you know, when we were just talking about communal grieving, I was thinking about the grief of holding space for so many worldwide atrocities right now and the grief that many of us are feeling daily. And how do we live with that? How do we hold space for that pain, sorrow?
Yeah. That's a
Not
really good
alone,
point.
I think, is part of my answer, is not alone. And finding resources to support us. So I like the term self-resourcing rather than self-care because I think self-care has been co-opted by the beauty industry at this point, personally. But, how do we resource ourselves in all of the good ways to show up in our life, whether that's pulling on physical supports, eating well, sleeping well, tending to our body, you know, having energetic support, whether that's like a massage or a bubble bath, if that's what you love. How do we be with nature? How do we feel the resources of wisdom from our ancestors, from our community around us? And I just think about that. How do we pull more resources in when we need them? And how do we give those resources to others when they are in need?
Yeah. That's an excellent point about like the collective grief of the world. And I think too, like sending it right back of like, well, what is it that you need? I think sometimes, and I've experienced this recently where like, you're having a hard time and somebody puts it on you and they're like, well, what do you need?
Mm-hmm.
Like you're being like, hey, help
I
me. And
don't
they're like,
know.
well, right. The first question is the first answer is,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Or like, or maybe you do know, but it takes work to find it. And it's that
Yeah.
thought of like, fuck, don't make me do more. Like I'm already in
Mm-hmm.
so much pain. Like now I have to do the
Mm-hmm.
work to figure out what I need. Like that's just too much. And so I think I mean, yeah, giving yourself the space and time to find out what you need, but also that like that little bit of hard work to figure it out is going to be so worth it in the long haul. And like maybe getting
Mm-hmm.
somebody to support you in finding those needs.
Yeah. I think like grief counseling, um, having a good friend to help walk you through that conversation. And as a friend, maybe you want to offer options. If your person's frozen and I don't know what I need, I think about the nervous system a lot and being in a shutdown state. And how can we offer some clear, tangible options instead of how can I support you or I'm here to help. Maybe it's here, here are some ways I'd love to support you. I could take your kids for the weekend. I could cook you a couple meals for your freezer. I could drive you to all your medical appointments next week. I can send flowers. I could call or text every day. Asking people how they want to be supported when we can give those clear options, sometimes easier, like you're saying, to answer a multiple choice question rather than a anything under the sun question.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. So much more helpful sometimes if somebody is just kind of sitting there with, and also because I also think that that should be almost the default if you're the one supporting, in like when somebody says, "Oh, nothing." Right? If somebody's like, "Oh, there's
Mm-hmm.
nothing I can do like that you can do," it's like, let me just check by giving you like a multiple choice question instead. Because yeah, right?
Yeah.
Like it's so easy to just dismiss and be like, "Oh, no, nothing," because that's the immediate answer. And like we've been taught in this capitalistic individualistic society that like you just got to take care of yourself. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So normalizing that, saying something like, well, I know sometimes it's helpful when people don't have to cook. So would it be helpful if I arranged a food train to send food? Yeah, exactly. I think that is a very good point. Often we're not prepared to receive support sometimes, right?
and it's so unusual sometimes, right? Like we haven't even been taught because there's the learning how to give, but there's also learning how to receive the support. So
Hmm.
many of us don't even know how to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's a real sign of strength when someone can receive support or ask for help. And I'm trying to normalize that, receiving, encouraging people to receive. And like you said, kind of goes against those lessons of thinking we have to do it all on our own. I don't think we can do this on our own. I don't think the human experience was designed to be done alone.
Living is too hard for that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that there's really a need to be with one another when we're in grief, because it can feel so isolating.
And yeah, and I guess like finding other people that are going through the same grief, whether or not that's from the same person who died that you both love, or other people who have lost somebody or lost the same thing that you have and the same flavor.
Yeah, absolutely. I was supporting a client recently in finding resources because their partner was transitioning. And so I thought that's a pretty unique experience. And in your journey, this is a journey of loss for you because your their identity is shifting. And so, is there a community of support, a support group or some kind of community that is going through the same thing who can relate and share stories? Because it is so supportive when we have people around us saying, you're not alone. I can relate. This is hard.
Yeah. And they actually know what you're talking about, right? Like it's great
Yeah,
when somebody says like, "Hey, I get it." And it's like, okay, sometimes you just know
we
that
really
they
don't get
don't.
it.
Yeah, and it's like that's actually not
Yeah.
helpful for you to tell me that you get it. I actually because there's also the opposite where people are like, "Oh, like I understand," or like, "Oh, they try to equate it to their experience." And it's like,
Hmm.
"Actually, I really don't need you to start talking about your experience. This is kind of about me right now, and I need it to be about my experience."
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really problematic to try and say, share, yeah, I know what you're feeling. I totally understand. I've been there. No, you haven't. We haven't, right? Even even one loss, if somebody dies, it's going to impact everybody differently. Um, 5 people losing their partner is going to be a completely different experience for every one of those people. And so I think the best way is just to be there as compassionate, also hurting humans alongside one another. And I know that there can be a lot of relief and support when people are alongside other grievers. So that's one resource I would say if there are people listening who feel, oh, I would like some support. There are often resources at local hospice organizations, often run support groups or have supportive counseling, grief counseling. often free through hospice. Um, our local hospice has a wonderful Here Make a Bereavement walking group where people get together as peers. And so those are some things I would, search for if you're in a different community and looking for supports can be helpful.
Yeah, thanks. That's beautiful. So there's one other kind of like topic that we discussed that I'd love to just like touch on, which was like how grief and sex are can be related and how they can really like, yeah, start to impact one another. And I think even in that, it's just like hard emotions and like you said, like hard processes that you have to go through will always impact how you show up in relationships, how you show up in sex.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and like sometimes it feels like inaccessible and that like you can't go to one place because you're in another, and that makes perfect sense. But I think the one thing I would say in this area is that in my experience, it's that you need to go through the hard emotion. And so like if you find a block and you're like you want to like kind of go around it, and I'm sure this is true with like any experience where like but in sex it's the same way where like people try to go around it and they're like, oh well, I just kind of want to get to pleasure and that's over there, so I'm just going to kind of like bury this grief, bury this pain, and like go around it. But the way to kind of get to the other side is by going through it, right? And that like feel that pain, cry out those tears, and like through that experience you can experience like the almost the pleasure in the emotion. Like I know that that may sound almost sadistic, but I've definitely had experiences where like the sadness felt so good to feel that I was in pleasure at the sadness, right? Like it feels
Mhm.
so good to feel it that yeah, you could this is how sadgasms exist.
I just think of the word alive when you're describing that experience of really rich connection with sadness. And I think that that can happen when we really allow ourselves to come into contact with any emotion that deeply. It can be beautiful, if not, like I said, pleasurable.
Yeah, pleasurable is the whole next level and definitely not accessible all the time for
No.
like, and it's after you've processed it a lot. But yeah, I think there's such a lesson in like the greater space of that too, that like the only way is to go through it. And we all know that there's moments where you can't go into it. And so you have to go around it. And, but like that eventually, if you want to get all the way through, you have to go through. Like you have to feel it. There's, there's no shortcut.
Yeah, and I think there's no timeline for feeling all those feelings. That's something I've heard a lot in grief is it can be hard to feel pleasure of any kind or feel that we want to engage in intimacy or connection with people when we've lost someone or had a different kind of loss, like a trauma, for example. Um, and so there can be a real pulling away from pleasure and pushing away from intimacy and connection. And and I've heard a lot of people talk about a lot of different things that work for them in terms of coming back into connection with pleasure and intimacy and love in ways that feel good. And I think the one thing that I think is so important is just to appreciate the uniqueness of everyone's journey there and that there's really no timeline and doing what works for you in terms of coming back into contact with others or even with yourself. And yeah, and even pleasure in life. Sometimes people feel guilt to be alive when someone has died. And so, how do you allow yourself to find joy in life, find pleasure, and really lean into that? That may take time.
Hmm. Yeah. It is always almost the annoying thing to hear, though, right? That you're like, I don't want it to take time. I don't want it
Mm.
to be something that I have to like go through the process. I just want to skip to the end of it. I'm so frustrated by this whole like long process I have to go through. Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah. And the answer is there's no good answer, but that you're feeling grief, which means you're alive and you're human.
Mhm. Mhm.
All right. So as we kind of come to the end, is there anything else that really comes to mind that you'd love to touch on or something that you'd like to leave listeners with?
Hmm. I'm feeling really grateful to have had this conversation, and I think I'm feeling alive being able to have this conversation with you about grief and loss and to pull those topics out of the shadow. And yeah, I guess that's my hope, is that this can create a ripple and have someone thinking about loss or grief or ritual, or doing some of your own preparation, thinking forward to our own deaths, which hopefully are a very long time away. But I think it's healthy to remember that, there's only one way out of this life, and we never know when that will come, and to really appreciate the richness of life. Lean into all that we want to do while we're here.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely what keeps me running at full pace is, oh my gosh, life, it's happening. Let's go. The fear of death is what keeps me vibrantly alive.
Yeah, and it's so beautiful to be with life, in this present moment. I've been resting in that idea of rest for some time now, of how to just be in contact with what is needed in life. And if that's grief, and if that's an extended period of sadness, be in it, lean into it. Like you said, feel that sadness so richly, so deeply, really honor it. And I think that is part of what makes us human.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yes. I do feel like this like calmness almost. I think like the more that you say it, the more like that acceptance flows through. There's like this sense of calm. Like, right, okay. And like I think that comes like again from one of like your beautiful teachings here of that so much of it just needs to be experienced together. And so we can experience so much anxiety and so much fear and so much loss by yourselves that can feel just so hard to handle. But the second you open up and share with one other person, everything just feels lighter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that feels like a sacred space to be able to be in with somebody, right? Is to really be here with that. And what an honor.
Yeah. Yes. Oh my goodness. So thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom and for just, oh, I'm so excited to re-listen to this and to like hear all the wisdom back. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on and being with us today. And yeah, before we go, is there anything that you'd love to give a shout out to, anything you'd like to promote, or share any aspects of your work or how people can get in contact?
I would love to hear from people if they have curiosities or desire for support. Um, One of my community offerings is hosting conversations around death and grief. And so I'm hosting a death cafe in June here in Vancouver. That will be posted on my website if anyone wants to join. And yeah, and if anyone is curious to learn more or to think about advanced care planning, I have some links on my website too for how to get started.
All right. And we will post that website in the description below. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kris.
And with that, we come to the end of this episode of Reclaim Your Radiance. Thank you so much for listening in. If you enjoyed this episode and came away with some valuable insights, the absolute best way you can show your support and appreciation is by sharing it with your friends or on social media. Your support is absolutely invaluable. To connect, find us on Instagram at Hell of a Hall or on TikTok at Reclaim Your Radiance. Or you can sign up for our mailing list to receive bonus content and stay in touch with what's happening in the world of Reclaim Your Radiance, including local workshops, retreats, self-love courses, personal one-on-one coaching, and so much more. Head on over to the episode notes in the show description to find those links, and we hope to hear from you soon. All right, everyone, until next time, stay radiant.